So if you remember back in Judges 13:5, this was the prophecy to the parents of Samson. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. He shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. If you want to know a little bit more about the Nazarite vow, here's Wikipedia. The word comes from Nazir, meaning consecrated or separated. It's almost like Samson was a uh, consecrated religious, although, of course, he's not vowed celibacy. What has he vowed? Abstain from all wine and anything else made of the grape vine plant. And they list things like that. Refrain from cutting the hair on one's head, but allow the locks of the head's hair to grow. Do not become ritually impure by contact with corpses or graves, even those of family members, although you could argue he kills so many people that he's coming in contact with corpses. But we see in the pattern of these stories, and Samson is almost a mythical figure. He's like Hercules or Superman, more like Hercules, in that he's this figure of incredible strength. But from the perspective of the Old Testament, he has his strength because of his vow to God. He has been consecrated to God so that he can fulfill God's purpose in him to begin to free Israel from the hand of the Philistines. But what gets Samson into trouble? Women. Of course, there's his first wife, who is hardly faithful to him. And then in this chapter, he dallies with a prostitute, and because of that, he's almost captured. But then he falls in love with Delilah. And even though Delilah tricks him 3 different times, tell me the source of your strength. And he tells her 3 different things, which apparently are lies, because Samson likes to riddle and trick people. She binds him. She tries to get him captured. She keeps saying, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. They rush at him and he breaks his bonds or his chains, and it doesn't work. But what does it? He's finally honest with her. She cuts his hair, and that violates his vow. Now, you can either look at this symbolically and say, well, the hair represents his connection with God, because when you got hair, you can't even see mine today. Yeah, there we go. When you got hair like this, it means you're connected with heaven. So there's that symbolically, but it also isn't just that Samson, remember, Samson is abandoned by God, because once his hair is cut, he thinks he can still escape. He doesn't realize, as it says in this chapter, that the Lord has left him. And so he's not able to break out of his bonds. And then the Philistines capture him and they put his eyes out. They blind him and they make him a slave. And he's pushing the mill. And then they bring him out at this big party where 3,000 people are gathered, and they make him do tricks. He's nothing more but like a performing monkey for them at this point in his career. Now, God has abandoned him and left him to his own strength, which is not enough to escape. Why does God do this? I think it's a sign. In a sense, Samson has abandoned God by abandoning his vows. And he does it through a kind of weakness of the flesh for these women who aren't good for him. And he eventually tells Delilah the truth, and so he should know better. He should know that she's out to get him. And by abandoning his vow and abandoning his vocation, then God, as a sign, responds by, in effect, abandoning him, leaving Samson to his own wiles, which are not strong enough to escape. But then as Samson is standing between the 2 pillars, where he's asked the boy to lead him blind, he prays to God, give me this one last chance to destroy my enemies. God grants him again his superhuman strength, pushes apart the pillars. The entire structure comes crashing down, killing everybody inside, including Samson. So his last act is, you might say, true to what he was called to do, even though he pays for it with his life. Now, let's take a look at a little something from James, which I've got here somewhere, and I've got to get to it from here. One of the things James tells us, after he tells us that in God there is no shadow of turning, he says that God, he chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. God brings us forth through the logos, is the Greek word here, which means the comprehensibility, logic, understandability, the fact that the cosmos fits together. And it also means Jesus Christ, the Word of God. So that through this new creation, after the resurrection of Christ, we become the first fruits of all that he created. Now, in the original tale, in Genesis, man is not created until the sixth day. We're not the first fruits of God's creation, but in the new creation, brought about by the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, we are, in fact, Christ is the first fruits, and we are given a share in that. We are the beginning of a new creation. And in a way, Jesus refers to that in Mark 13 when he keeps talking about all these strange apocalyptic things. At one point, Jesus says, before this generation ends, these things will come to pass. And that confuses people. But at the very least, what he seems to be meaning there is within 40 years of Jesus having said this, in fact, not one stone upon another stood at the temple. And quite literally, when he says, you see all these stones in this magnificent temple, I tell you, not one stone will stand upon another. And then he talks about all these other things that will happen before the end of time. Now, that, what Jesus is referring to in history, in the near history, was in AD 70, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem to suppress their rebellion and destroyed this temple, the second temple that had been built after Solomon's. So quite literally that comes true, and those in this generation, here comes the wind, live to see it. And then more than that, of course, is the mystery of everything else that Jesus alludes to about the end times. We can go into some of that in class if you'd like to. But at any rate, hopefully, I've at least helped you understand a bit about what's going on in Samson and James and the gospel. And then, of course, we have Hezekiah, who's grateful that God is not killing him immediately, but has given him another 15 or 16 years, whatever the number is. But Hezekiah still seems a little down in the dumps. More about that tomorrow as the readings continue.